Welcome to the SoundGirls Living History Project. I'm Christina Milinusic. I'm Alberta's chapter head for SoundGirls. Today I'm joined with Dr. Rebecca Mercuri. We met recently at the spring convention for the Audio Engineering Society, oddly enough at an after party hosted by SoundGirls. Rebecca's career has been a mix of music and technology. Thank you so much for joining us today, Rebecca. Do you mind introducing yourself?
Thank you so much, Christina. It's excuse me. It's great to be here, and sorry about that. Great to talk to you and the Sound Girls about my work and my career, the interesting path that I had. So I can introduce myself, Rebecca Mercuri, Ph.D., founding president of Notable Software Incorporated. And I primarily work these days as a digital forensics investigator and expert witness.
Wow. So I'm just fascinated. Where did you grow up? And was there a person that got you involved in computer technology and music? I'd love to hear the early history.
Yeah, it's sort of back to the roots part.
Yeah.
So I was born in Philadelphia, PA. So I'm a Philadelphian, born and bred. And we spent my first 4 years, I was the first child of my parents. And we spent the first 4 years in an area called East Oak Lane. It's a historic section, many beautiful homes. And my family was renting an apartment in one of those homes there, which still exists. And it's called an area called North Philadelphia. Or North Philly. And when I was, I guess I was about 4.5 years old, my family moved to Glenside, to Abington Township, just outside of the boundaries of the city of Philadelphia. And that's where I lived, my entire growing up years, until I moved out, in my early 20s. So there were influencers in my life early on, and I must always give credit to my mom and dad. We have the perfect left brain, right brain family, with my mom being the liberal arts, and she was an English professor at Drexel University for many years. My dad, a science teacher in the Philadelphia School District for 41.5 years until his retirement. And he taught all sorts of things, chemistry mostly, but also the physical sciences. And for me, actually, when I was young and was first, starting to pick up things and stuff, it was noticed early on when I started writing that I was ambidextrous. And, back in the day, that was really frowned upon. I mean, it could have been worse because my dad, he was probably really left-handed. And, they used to like swat your hand if you used it. And then, it was, left-handed, sinister, especially in an partly Italian family. You're not supposed to use your left hand as your primary hand. So that likely gave him asthma. But my parents were not concerned about me being ambidextrous. But my first grade teacher was, who said you have to pick a hand for writing lessons. And so, just to be contrarian, since everybody else picked right, I picked left. But I think I am somewhat more left-handed. Me and my sister is entirely left-handed. My brother and I are really ambidextrous. Sorry about this. But the fact that I am ambidextrous, there is definitely a left brain, right brain component. When I was studying for my Ph.D. qualifying exams, I noticed, but other people didn't notice, that when I was doing math problems, I was working them with my right hand. And oftentimes my students, when I would be lecturing at the board, I didn't even notice this until students started pointing it out. I would write with my left hand, and then I took the chalk over here into my right hand, and I would, if it was math, only if it was math formulas. And so there is definitely cognitive differences in people who are ambidextrous. Supposedly the central portion of the brain, sort of keeps things on one side or the other, but there's more conversation between the two hemispheres when you're ambidextrous. And I think that I don't know for a fact, I've never had a brain scan, but from studies that I've read, I know that actually does cause people to be more multifaceted in both the arts and the sciences, and in math and engineering, as well as music performance and things like that. So I think that was really the perfect stimulation, and I'm glad that nobody really made it seem illegal for me to write with my left hand. In fact, there was a time when I was trying to get my dad to just hold a pencil in his left hand, and he was very fearful and wouldn't do it. So it was an early, very early training. So don't do that to your kids. So anyway, those were some early things. Then I also had a great professor. My undergraduate education was primarily at Penn State University, and Professor Tom Worms noticed all of these talents. And also noticed that my math skills weren't that good. I was having problems in calculus. But he really encouraged me. And there was also a professor, I took a couple of classes at Temple University, because I was still in this Philadelphia area. I was studying at the Abington campus, never really, except for one thing, went up to the main campus. So I still stayed in the Philadelphia area for my whole education. There's a professor who, unfortunately, I can't remember his name, at Temple University. He had many patents, and it amazed to me that there was a person who could just write these patents and get patents on things. It was very inspiring. And we had, we're really talking the 70s. So what they had there, at Penn State Abington, we were connected to an IBM mainframe, an IBM 370 mainframe at the main campus. And we had to start up our terminal at the Abington campus by loading literally a deck of cards that would boot up, that would indicate to the main campus that we were up and running down there. And then after that, you actually, in my first programming, you actually punched cards and you would put your programming deck into the hopper, and it would send the program up to main campus. Later, just a few years later, they started to have the terminals and you could actually type things in. But that was really primitive. Over at Temple University, though, they have this mini computer. It's what it did is trivial. I mean, your phone does a gazillion things more than this thing did. But it was a mini computer. It's called the PDP-7, and it ran with paper tape, actually. So you didn't punch it, but you could type into a keyboard, and it made this paper tape that it would run that through. Later, again, that one got adapted to being able to record directly to magnetic tape. And you could program in a variety of languages there. I early on learned assembly language, Fortran. So I never learned COBOL, and I'm glad that I never learned it. Although it's a major business language, I never learned that. But we worked on that, and also at Temple, that same professor allowed me. That you had to do a hardware design project, and I really wanted to do a synthesizer. So I had found a keyboard in the trash and got these parts and was putting this thing together with some Radio Shack microprocessor that was available at the time in the mid to late 70s. And it was amazing. And those were really amazing experiences that really influenced me.
And you were studying Bachelor of Music for this undergrad, correct?
No. I started out as a Bachelor of Music at Penn State, but immediately, within like 1 or 2 semesters, I really didn't want to major in music there because they didn't really have a good music program at that campus. Up at the main campus, they did. But I really wanted, the computers were just so fascinating. I just wanted to do the computers. So, in fact, I probably didn't even admit to this, but in fact, being small and the trash cans being very large, we had all our printouts would go into the trash cans. They would hide me in the trash can at the end of the day, and the doors would be locked. And then, I would be in the trash can. They'd check, the facilities people would check and make sure the room was locked. And then I would emerge from the trash can, open the doors to the building, and let my friends in, and we would just basically keep the computer running and program for hours more. We never got caught. There were never any webcams like there are now, but we weren't doing anything illegal. We just kept programming well into the night, even in those days, and we just loved it. It was just so fantastic. So I was there basically as a computer science major, and that's what my first computer science degree was, from Penn State. But again, that music lore was still in me. And so I guess it was in my second year at Penn State, I applied. I had always heard of the school, the Philadelphia Musical Academy. A great number of great musicians had come out of there, and I wanted to go there. Plus, they had a Moog synthesizer, a big one, and with the cables and everything, which I never got to program because I could never fit the time into my schedule. But I got to hang out, and there were some of my friends. But I really wanted to go there, so I actually applied there, did my music audition on classical guitar, and also was thinking of a music ed degree, but wound up not finishing up the music ed degree. I was a few credits short and didn't do the teaching and practicum internship. But so I was essentially at Penn State and the university, which now the Philadelphia Musical Academy became Philadelphia College of Performing Arts, and now it's part of the University of the Arts. So I was there at those two schools simultaneously, and Penn State was terms, so it was 10-week terms, and you would take 3 or 4 classes a term, usually 3, but you would take 3, 3, and 3, so you were doing 9. And then down at the University of the Arts, I was doing 4 and 4. So 9 and 8, I was doing a double load, because really when you're doing those two completely diverse degrees, there was only a year of coursework, your basic English, all that sort of stuff. That was the only thing that overlapped. So I was very used to, not getting much sleep, working nonstop, and that's just sort of my constitution. But I really enjoyed, having that opportunity to exercise, again, both parts of my brain simultaneously. And I find that if I don't do that, if I just stray into one side or the other, then I'm usually wind up not very happy. So I need to get that back in, whether it either just be by going to concerts and music performances. I'm a subscriber, have been prior to COVID, subscriber to many arts events and museums and things like that. So I always try to get both sides in. And I think that it's really good for anybody who is, I think of audio engineering as it's the perfect complement, because it's the audio. Some of you are performers also, but some of you are just staying behind the keyboard, the consoles, the microphones. They're staying in the backside of it. So I like to refer to it as the front side of the microphone and the back side of the microphone. And I think the more you know about what goes on at the front side of the microphone, it really does make you better able to understand what is going on with the struggles of the performer and how you can better help them and how you can actually better enhance their sound and what they're doing. So yeah, I think it's really important.
It's so interesting from this cognitive neuroscience standpoint about which parts of the brain are actually processing things at once, because it's an ipsilateral thing with writing, right? You're right-handed, but that's actually your left brain. And so there's these interesting things, and it's like the neuroscience of the human and how these action potentials are going off in our brain. There's some relationship there, I think, between how a computer works and how we've designed computers to work, and what areas, what microprocessing goes on. Well, so it's really fascinating.
It is, and it's even true in the design of musical instruments. Most people, the majority of people, are right-handed. So playing the guitar the regular way, you're playing it right-handed, but it's wait, but all the work is going on in the left hand. So why is that? Same with the violin. But there is a reason for that. And the reason is because when it's your dominant hand, so think of it, you're holding like this. So look at monkeys. When they're climbing, we were, maybe once monkeys. When you're climbing, you're using your dominant hand, and you're, there's an underhand like this, and there's the overhand. This is your stronger hand. So the guitar, you're strumming really with your stronger hand. Although most of the work, the notes and stuff, is really coming out of here, but the way it physically lays out is really for the right-handed person. Same with the violin. But so it is amazing that is the way those instruments developed over the centuries. And so I never felt uncomfortable and I never felt that I needed to be left-handed. I actually taught left-handed guitar students, and it was bizarre because you're like I'm used to having the other guitarist being parallel to me, but then you're looking like in a mirror at them, you know. So it was really interesting. I never could understand until I learned about that climbing thing, that whole, the weak hand and the strong hand. Until I learned about that, I really never understood why I couldn't understand. You're left-handed, but so am I. Just hold it this way. No, I can't. And there really is a cognitive thing with strong, I would say, strong left-handers that really, need to be able to play it this way. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like one of the strong hand is kind of taking care of that time component, the rhythm, and then the delicate, precise hand where you're playing all the notes is really about the position and the space. It's very interesting.
Right, and it's not just the rhythm, but it's also the volume too. You're emphasizing, especially
the amplitude,
the amplitude and what you're doing. But it is sort of the neglected arm. But it is interesting. With piano, of course, this was a problem with piano. Family all learned piano from our mom, starting at the age of 4. And my mom would say, "You're just banging with your left hand," because in the piano, you really need to be more subtle with the left hand and, try to emphasize more with the right hand. So yeah, the left hand in piano, you do not want that to be the dominant hand. I wonder if there are any left-handed concert pianists. That would be interesting to find out.
It would be very interesting. And then even now, again, technology as now we have polyphonic aftertouch and all these things that make it more like a hammer.
Keyboards, if you're playing the organ, so it's all very different now. Yeah, totally. You can accommodate to whatever. But on a regular acoustic piano, there's no freedom.
So I just want to quickly ask you what your first audio engineering job was.
Okay, so this was back when I was a undergraduate student at Penn State. Tuition was a hefty sum of money, $200 per trimester. I had to come up with $600, and that was a lot of money back in the 70s. Back in that time frame. So that you had to scrape that together. So I was teaching guitar lessons in the basement of my parents' house, and at Penn State they had jobs posted, and one of them was working in AV. And what you did in AV was, because again, this was the 70s, so if a teacher wanted to show a video, you had to move a film projector into their room, set up the reel, put it all up, and set up all the equipment. Same thing with slide projectors. You were setting up all this equipment, and then because if you're in AV, you also got to help out with the student things where they had the student clubs and the videos and movies where we get professional movies and that we would rent and stuff like that. So I was always in the AV booth. So I was doing the AV for that, and I was also doing the AV. And they paid you a pittance. I mean, like, minimum wage was $1.25. I don't know what it was. But the cool thing is that if you were fast at it, you could sign up for multiple classes at the same time. They'd be on the same hallway or on the same floor. And so I would run to the room, pick up the equipment, move it into the classroom, set up the thing, go to the next room, and I would do like 3 of them. So I got a whopping, $5, but for $200 tuition, and then if you did that multiple times a day and multiple days a week, you were really earning, the money that you actually needed. And yes, they took taxes out of that too, but that was actually the thing there. So, but the thing I have to also tell you is that one of my classmates at Penn State Abington was a guy by the name of Eddie Saletti, and audio engineers will be familiar with his name because he often gives talks at the different AES shows. He was working in New York for a long while and basically created his own company. I think he's out further, in the United States, but he basically does a lot of refurbishments of equipment, especially like tape machines, and also, setting things up so that these older recordings can be archived. He's given a number of really great talks about that. And I mean, he's got such a lyrical name, Eddie Saletti, but it's always been great. Every time I would run into Eddie at the AES show in New York, we just always give each other a big hello. So yes, you have to, you're writing his name down. You have to meet him. So he's really cool. And now we were both at Penn State together and doing AV. So it was really cool. So we became, lifelong colleagues. So it's really great.
This transition, like I'm wondering, like two more things, kind of like what was your experience, not to get too much into the gender thing, but what was your experience at that time in the 70s doing, more like computer science based studies? Like how was that for you? Like did you ever notice anything? Or
no, there was nothing very weird. There was nothing really very weird about it. There were, again, still very few women in the field. Originally in Philadelphia, the women were the programmers of the ENIAC computer. Kay Mockley and her husband, later to be husband, many of them married the engineers. So her husband, John Mockley, she was hired. They were hired as computers. And so they were the people who were doing the calculations. They eventually got redeployed from doing, the things they were doing was some differential equations, and they were working all this out. They all had math degrees. And then the engineers were working on building the ENIAC computer. But the women were redeployed from doing this math over to doing the programming of the ENIAC computer. They never received the recognitions that they should. Many of the men won many awards. The women were essentially ignored until a few decades ago when they started reviving information about the women at the ENIAC. But we knew them. I had met Kay Mockley, and John and Kay have a son, Bill Mockley, who actually became he started a company called Ensoniq, and they actually created the first audio chip, sound chip for the Apple II series. It was when they got the Apple II, when I was programming that, you had to just, write some assembly language routines, and it was like square waves. It was really bad sounding. So, but you could do a little bit of faking, if you wrote some, niftier assembly language programs, which I did do. So you could get multiphonics out of it, but basically you were sort of doing a cheat in there. But his company, Ensoniq, was hired by Apple Computer to design the first sound chip for the Apple II series of computers. And it was quite nice. And I actually interviewed over at Apple. They offered me a job. That would have been very life-changing. It would have been very different. But at the time, I really thought hard about it. But at the time, it just didn't seem like the right move for me. And probably it wouldn't have been, because that was when it was a great opportunity. But at the time, that was when Steve Jobs was getting on the outs and eventually had to leave. And he only took men with him over to Next. So maybe one or two women. But it was... Yeah, I would have been stuck in the Apple II division, because that's where I was going to be working, and I might not have worked on the Mac, and who knows. But you can't know about the future. But anyway, it was really excellent opportunities for me to be able to work on the Apple II computers, because that was my first personal computer that I owned. I got an Apple II Plus, and I would just always take that thing apart. Change the chips out so that it had upper and lower case, because it didn't have upper and lower case back in the day. Had very few, very little memory storage, very little RAM. So, we had expansion cards. So I was always designing cards and stuff for it. It was, this was really great. I got to experiment with that, write software for it. So it was sort of like the best of times, but in a way also sort of the worst of times. We'll get to some of the worst of times when we get to the RCA experiences. But in the 70s, I guess now we're in the early 80s when I got the Apple. But I think it was great. I didn't really see it as, oh yeah, there's no other women in these classes. I just, we just made friends, and, it was all cool, so... So I didn't really, I think it was because of the professors. The professors I had were really encouraging to me, and in a way that helped me to just feel like part of the guys. So that was, I didn't really think of it as anything peculiar.
Now, in terms of like just the computer history, and we're going to get into why this history is so important to like digital audio today in a minute, but just for my own sake, I know that like I think it was in the 60s was that when you had the Commodore 64 and the Sinclair, and like what was the history of that stuff?
Yeah,
Like,
that I really was not. I was not into. This was all you have to do is watch Young Sheldon, because he had the radio. He has the radio. If you watch the TV show Young Sheldon,
okay.
you see him. It's really more the '80s. He's very addicted to Radio Shack, and he even makes the comment in one of the shows. You can tell I watch it all the time. He makes a comment in one of the shows. Oh, this company will be in existence forever. Of course, you have to laugh because it's sad, because Radio Shack doesn't any longer exist. But that's where you would go for parts and things like that. And they did sell a lot of computers there, of course, their own line of computers and things. So this was really more late 70s and then into the 80s. So that's 60s. There was. Yeah, there were even like the little Texas Instrument one stuff were really these portable ones. RCA did have a primitive computer that they sold for a while, but these were like sort of late 70s. But it was really in the 80s when you could really start to. It was like late 70s, early 80s when you could start to buy stuff that you could take home and then get into the personal computer type of stuff. And then it was interesting, largely for games and stuff. They wanted to have better audio because there was a lot of games like Pong. That was a big game. This pixel going back and forth on the screen, but the sounds were cool. So there was a lot with regard to that type of thing, and so sound became more important. But sound has still never achieved the type of importance, in the computer, like in computer gaming and stuff like that it really should have. There's a lot more that we could do with holophonics. Finally now, and we're talking, it's 2021. Now we're talking about having meetings with three-dimensional sound and holophonics and spatialization and all sorts of stuff like that. And we were working on all of those formulas that they're all talking about now, all of that. We were working on all that. All of that stuff was being done in the 80s and the 90s. But it just wasn't picked up on. It was just this, even the idea of stereo. One of the things I worked on when I was at RCA, I mean, I didn't really work on it. I was a part of it. They were rolling out stereo television. Okay, this is like the mid 1980s, like 84, 85. TVs were mono that entire time.
Wow.
Records and stereo and all sorts of stuff, but TV was not stereo. And even now, when you buy a fantastic TV, you still have to buy a sound bar or some big speakers, because the TV has the crappy little speaker. You buy $1,000 amazing flat screen TV, and these crappy little speakers are in the front. So it's still like that. I mean, it's 2021, but back in the 80s, RCA was like, and some of the other companies, the other manufacturers were saying, well, what if we had stereo TV? So, but the big question was, is it going to work? And how are we going to broadcast this? Remember, everything was going through the airwaves. Nobody had cable. There really wasn't, there were cables to, between the companies that were feeding the channels to Philadelphia and stuff. But, nobody had a cable. Everybody used their rabbit ears antennas, or maybe an antenna on the roof. But you really, how are they going to do that? And so creating a good stereo sound that was not going to be blurry or actually cancel itself out was a big project, especially up at NBC headquarters in New York. RCA owned NBC. Okay. And so at 30 Rock, they were doing all these A/B testing things. And the people at the labs knew, I was like totally into the audio stuff. And, hey, we'll send Rebecca up there for a little bit. and see, what she thinks about the sound. And it was like blind testing, okay, listen to this one, okay, listen to this one. We just did that for days and days and days. And they just wanted to know what you thought. There's also, I think they call it Intermod, where again, there's bouncing off of buildings of the radio
Yeah.
signal and stuff. So this Intermod was seeming to be problematic with some of the algorithms that they were using for decoding the sound on the other side. So this was a really big deal. And NBC, what they believe, if I'm reading my stations correctly, I'm hoping I'm getting this right. It was supposed to be the Tonight Show, or either the Tonight Show trumped them. I forget which way it was, but NBC was supposed to have the first stereo broadcast, but it might have been the Tonight Show. What station was the Tonight Show? I never can remember. But anyway, it was the station of the Tonight Show. I think basically another station broadcast in stereo before we did. We're like, no, this is not right. This was supposed to be NBC. Big glory with RCA. But anyway, it was just a little minor feud among the TV stations. But I remember that because that was, again, it was an exciting time. We were in on the ground floor of changing really the whole world of sound as far as television was concerned. But look how long it's taken. It's just still so slow, and we're still not quite there yet. So yeah, these were fascinating experiences that I had the opportunity on, which in looking back they seem amazing, but at the time I was like, okay, just go up to New York. And that, boy, they really fed you very well up there. You take off at around noon and go to some really wonderful New York restaurant, and you wouldn't come back till 2, but then you'd work late into the evening. So it was great. It was really great. And you were up on top of 30 Rock, and it was just fantastic. That was a great experience.
Oh, that's cool. It's so interesting. One of the articles I read of yours from '95 was about kind of the ordinary telephone and how people were wanting these multimedia interactive environments, kind of like the one we're using today for Zoom. And I just think it's so interesting how these things have developed, like and what's involved with that technology. As you say, like, it's very different whether it's going through, the signal's going through a physical fiber cable or Ethernet cable, or it's being broadcast. And I think we'll get kind of more into this as we talk about your ham radio stuff in a little bit here.
Exactly. And what's very interesting is that Alexander Graham Bell did, when he was working on, the Hello Watson, I hear you, all of this sort of early stuff, there was a design for putting 2 earphones, like you just, because you had the microphone, I guess the microphone was here on the phone, and then you had the earphone. So you held the earphone up to your ear, and then you spoke into this microphone. But he had the idea of having 2. So you could basically get a stereo signal. So you had to have, another microphone somewhere also. And he actually wrote in his notes, there's diagrams about that, and he wrote in his notes that you could better localize the sound. So this is what,
Absolutely.
the 1890s, 1880s? He knew this. And what we call, everybody in audio engineering had better know what the Bloomline pair is. Bloomline with, put the microphones this way, and, then you'll get that spatialized sound. Well, Bloomline, he had access to other information at AT&T. And I still think that, I was there at AT&T decades later, and all of that literature from Alexander Graham Bell was there. And so it was there for him to find. There was a lot less for him to sort through in order to find it. And so the whole idea of the Bloomline pair, I still think it really came from Alexander Graham Bell. But it is great because it does spatialize it, because your 2 ears hear differently. And if you put the microphones at the width of your head, then what you're collecting is really that sound of what your ears are getting. And then, you can, there's also that whole A plus B, A minus B thing, but we won't get into that. But all of that stuff, again, was known about and predated Bloomline and all that. I'm not saying, don't give credit to Bloomline, but the fact of the matter is that all of those things were around for stereo recording, but then we weren't using it for stereo broadcasting. We were, it was just, you see all the pictures, there's a single mic, and that's what you're really recording there. So it is very interesting. Yeah, it all goes back. And the more you know about the engineering, the more you can appreciate what people were thinking about early on.
Yeah, and it even goes back to the designs in nature. Like, I recently found out that owls who can hear and are so good at sound localization actually have a displacement in level in their ears. So one ear is actually quite significantly higher or lower than the other ear, and that helps with spatialization too. And then the role of the pinna, like, why don't we have microphones that have pinnas around them?
Exactly.
Because that's going to shape the sound so much, and we do it all just with the pickup pattern. But there are physical things in the design mechanisms that we can do that are so cool. And really, I think the more women are involved at the base level of the design and manufacturing of audio gear, the more of these little areas of investigation will be open to.
Some ears are actually better than others. They did a thing where they molded ears and then put them on people, and they could hear better because the different pinnae, it's actually, is better for reproducing sound. And by the way, the owl's ear is really its face. You notice the way its eyes, it has those feathers coming out. That's the sort of suction cup of where the sound is coming in, and then there's the ear slits that are actually displaced. So but it's like a funnel. So that's
amazing.
Like a funnel. Yeah, look at their faces. So yeah, the owls are just really amazing. And the way that they localize, I mean, they can hear a little mouse scurrying from top of a tree. They can hear it scurrying, and they will go down on it and localize it immediately. So those types of things, trying to learn from nature. But also the fact of the matter is that our two ears, just like our two eyes, see differently. And that's partly also how we spatialize as well. We're getting different signals from our eyes as well as from our two different ears. And then our brain trying to fuse this together. It's like, okay, I got to make this into something so you won't bash into the table when you're walking across the room. So the fact that they're different is actually very important. And also inside of your ear, one thing that we talk about stereo, or 3D video, or like sort of a room spatialization, and we talk about 3D audio. They're not really the same mechanism at all. Your retina is a completely entirely different mechanism than your cochlea. And your cochlea's got all those little fibers in there that are wiggling and creating currents and all sorts of things that are going on. Your eyeball's not doing any of that. Your eyeball's getting in the light and it's activating the
cones and rods, and essentially.
Right, and then that's turning into the electrical signals. It all winds up as the electrical signals going to the brain, but your ear is a completely different physiological mechanism than your eye. So when people are trying to do the same thing sort of mathematically on one to the other, I think they're inherently doing the wrong thing, because they're not thinking about the physiological and not thinking about the understanding that these mechanisms are very different and they're collecting signals in a very different way. Not only that, look at the frequencies. The frequency of sound is vastly different, much lower than the speed of light. We know about the speed of light, and we know about the speed of sound. And so there's a whole, cognitive discourse about, that's going on in your brain to try to figure out these signals that are coming in at very different rates. So yeah, you need to keep that in mind when you're thinking about designing things, when you're thinking about modeling things. And if you're trying to replicate things, the same way for the different senses, you're probably going to be going down the wrong path. So it may seem okay, but it's probably not going to be the way you ultimately want to go.
And when you see something, it's very surface. Like, there's just such a different like when you close the door, the light stops maybe. But when you close the door, it kind of is like a filter in sound, like all the low frequency is still getting through. So it's interesting.
Yes, yes.
And one of the things that always confused me when I was starting out is like, okay, well, we have the electromagnetic spectrum, which is light, and then we have this, longitudinal mechanical spectrum for sound, but sound isn't just that either, because even when you look at the mechanism of the ear, yes, you have a physical pressure wave that's impacting the three little bones.
And the bones, right, exactly.
But then as soon as it goes past that second membrane, the ossicle membrane, you're into like the fluid-filled cochlea. And now we're talking about a different process. It's like almost like a hydroelectric process, right? And then it's going to the audio nerve, and then it's this kind of electric signal.
Yes.
But there's these transformations, and it's so interesting. Like, I just keep saying, it's so interesting, but it is. It really is quite fascinating. Yeah. And the amount of information we can get about the world that's so vastly different from our hearing sense than our sound sense is like, or from our vision sense is so different, because with hearing, we're hearing things that are going on in space. We hear what's behind us, but we can't see what's behind us. And no, we don't have an ear behind us, and yes, it's localized to the front, but the information is still kind of more surround than just the vision. Yes. And so I think it's a more holistic way of understanding the world.
And then that gets us into the issues with spatialization, because again, our eyes are in front. There's creatures that have eyes on the side, lots of but our eyes are in front, and there's this merging point of what we're seeing. So we're predisposed to localize sounds to the front. And even though we can make it almost perfect mathematically to spatialize surround sounds, our eyes still are going to be fooling us to take the back sounds and replace them to the front, because it's just the way our brain is working. We're just saying, well, these sounds need to be coming from the front. So you notice that, and it just cracks me up. For decades, again, going into a movie theater where they always have these sounds going like a helicopter going.
Yeah, from the front to it's going around, it's circling.
Exactly. And you go to the Audio Engineering Society, and you go into those little sound rooms where, we're going to display this. And it's always in motion. Why is it in motion? Because if they just placed it here, you would think it was there. So it's the motion of the sound that's giving you the cue. Oh, it came from the left, and now I hear it moving, so I'm not going to jump it back to the left when it gets over here. So it's moving this way, so then we'll think it continues this way. Same thing with front to back. And so, but we don't hear a lot of people talking about that. Again, this phenomenon is known, but it's like I want to almost hand out a card to each of these displayers at the Audio Engineering Society convention every single year that they have it, where there's somebody who's created, the next greatest thing, but also has forgotten about this because maybe they didn't know it. So it's really, again, we need to learn from the past. We need to remember that these things are not new discoveries. We're implementing these discoveries, but we shouldn't have to do all the scratch work. We want to keep moving forward. So I think it's disappointing to me. I mean, one of the talk things that we had at the conference that you and I attended was sessions about the noise wars. And the noise wars, oh my goodness. I mean, I really stopped going to the movie theaters because I just couldn't deal with the loud sounds, and it was just ridiculous. And I don't really like that. But people are, now want to be rushing back to the theater because they want to get that theater experience. But it doesn't have to be loud. It can be clear and it can be focused, but it doesn't have to be excruciatingly loud. Same thing with concerts. And I think that there has been, they're not saying the loud war has been won, but we are having a gradual lowering of it because people were realizing that they were damaging their hearing, especially performers. Some great performers ruined their hearing, because of being loud rock players and these giant speaker, assemblages. and yeah, we have to keep aware of this. I hope it doesn't go back up again, because it's just inhumane. We can't really do that.
I remember reading a book called, I think it was called Perfecting Sound Forever, and they focused a lot on compression and the use and overuse of compression by, like, commercial radios and even just mastering. And it was like, oh, louder is better, louder is better. But what a lot of people and consumers especially didn't really realize is that the more compression they were adding, the less information was actually passing through, and the quality was actually getting worse. So yes, it may have been louder and been like blaring through the TV as you're listening, oh, this ad is 20% louder, but it's actually, for me, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not buying that product. Right. They're screaming at me,
It's still a little louder. I mean, sometimes you still notice it in some ads and things like that, but it was ridiculous on the radio because, you constantly have your hand on the knob, every time commercials would come on. It was ridiculous. People were just like yelling at you, and it was just, it was really horrible. And yes, the quality. Well, we also have, AM and FM, which AM is now almost relegated to just talk now, and FM, you actually listen to some music. But it's, but it is interesting. I mean, it used to be both. You would have it on both. But it's really, again, the quality. And you could be doing a lot more with it. Again, it has a lot to do with the recording industry. What is the recording industry putting out? If they're just putting out these, pulsating, loud sounds, what's going to happen to this, when you're actually hearing it. So it is interesting. There's been, trends that, we've seen over the decades. And I mean, that's one of the great things about AES. I mean, I'm really glad that I joined AES. I wanted to mention a little bit about.
When did you join AES? What led you into?
Okay, so it was a series of interesting events in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Inquirer. That's our main newspaper, and that will have a lot of announcements of things. I don't know why we happen to have a copy of that particular Philadelphia Inquirer, but there was this little ad. It wasn't an ad. It was just a news item. It said there was going to be a concert of electronic music in Philadelphia at a Philadelphia hotel. And I was like, oh, I gotta go to this, this is really cool. Well, I get there and it was packed. I mean, everyone was sitting on the floor. There was no room in the chairs or anything. We're all jam-packed in. And RCA was there. They were demonstrating what their microcomputer, which is called the Cosmac VIP. You had to have these space age names. The Cosmac VIP, and there was a guy by the name of Andy Modla who had been programming audio games and things like that on the Cosmac VIP. And he wasn't the main inventor of the VIP, but he was the one who was doing the audio stuff. And he was there and had all this musical stuff. And then there were people from the Philadelphia Area Computer Society. And then before Bill Mockley was in Sonic, he was doing synthesizer stuff. And it was just all these synthesizer people from all around, in the greater Philadelphia area. And it just went on for hours. And afterwards, I went up and talked to Andy about RCA and stuff like that. And then it was shortly after that, I wound up submitting through, you could, a lot of these places, Bell Labs, AT&T, you couldn't get a job. You had to know somebody. But I knew somebody who knew somebody who worked at Sarnoff. So they gave me a application form to fill out, and then we passed it through the channels, and it landed on somebody's desk. And I must say that in my resume, I would always say, I would always refer to Penn State as the Pennsylvania State University, which is its legitimate name. But I figured people would trigger on the word university and think I went to the University of Pennsylvania. I did later for my second master's and my Ph.D., but I went to Penn State. But I didn't write Penn State out because I thought, if somebody's reading it quickly, they might think I went to UPenn. Well, they did. And so they gave me an interview, but I realized that later in a lunchtime conversation. But I wasn't doing anything bogus. So, but anyway, I was interviewed for the personal computer project, and they really wanted me because I was doing all this audio stuff by then, the stuff I was doing at Temple University and stuff like that. And so they basically hired me to work in the advanced microprocessor research lab. And so I was there with really, great people working on a personal computer that, the IBM PC was not yet out. It did come out before we released ours, which probably was what killed our project. But we had a lot of really great software on it. I was writing music manuscript software where you could actually write, put your compositions down, on the screen and print them out and stuff like that. That was not available in that type of format. So I was doing that. And it was when I was at RCA that I was like, oh, you had to get into AES. The form, my recollection is that you had to have 3 recommenders, and they all had to be members of the AES. Where are you going to know this? Well, at RCA Labs, you're going to know a lot of people who are members of the AES because Harry Olson, co-inventor of the RCA synthesizer, he was a big muck-a-muck in the AES. He received many medals from them and awards and stuff, and, I think served on the national board and stuff like that. So he was not there. He was already retired and quite ill by the time I started there. But there were many audio engineers still at RCA Labs, and I got them to sign off on it, and now I was a member. But because I lived in Pennsylvania, I was not identified by the New York chapter of the AES to join their chapter. They still do it by region where you live or work. And so I was invited by the Philadelphia chapter of the AES to join their chapter. I started attending meetings that were joint with the Philadelphia Acoustical Society chapter. So you got the best of physics and audio engineering and some really great people. The president was John Sank, longtime president, who had worked at RCA Labs down in Cherry Hill and was working with Harry Olson on some of these amazing microphones, the 77, the 44, everybody knows those numbers. You still see those microphones sold at the AES shows because, by other companies, because these are great ribbon microphones, wonderful, amazing inventions. And so, I got to meet people who had worked at the Camden RCA plant, in the recording area, working on microphones. The performers would, who had those microphones, they were rugged for the road, but they still would break down. So they would send them in and they would swap them out with another one, and then they would be repairing them and rotating them. They always had multiple microphones for some of the biggest performers that were using RCA microphones. And so that was how I got started in the AES. And then, of course, the great thing about AES, well, it used to be, for the longest time, it was every other year, New York, California usually. So it was back and forth. I must say I've never attended a California AES show. But every other year, I loyally, and, to this day, until COVID, continued to go to the AES show in New York. And I must say to anybody, it's so great, especially for students. You can get in as a student member, and oh my goodness, the prices, you can get into so many of the different things just for like $50, and go to all the classic talks, the keynotes, the award ceremonies, some of the big things. What you can't get to, you have to pay the extra money, is the academic papers, those sort of professional discussions, the small things. But you'll keep yourself busy there for 4 days, for an AES, just a regular AES pass. And so, if you keep going to the AES shows, you will see everything that is happening and will be happening in the future in audio at those shows. I was there in 1982 when it was either 82 or 83, again, depending on, which year it was in New York. But 82 was when the idea of the CD rolled out, and the first rollout at AES was at the New York AES show, and I was there. I mean, that was so cool. I mean, just to be able to be there for the rollout of CDs. Who knew, now who even has CDs? But at the time, the idea of digital recording, people thought it would create, neurological damages, and they would have you hold your hand out and listen to this thing, and they said they could press on your hand, it would go down. It sort of reminds me a lot about some of the virus conspiracy theories. But oh yeah, there were people who were saying, "Oh no, this is listening to digital music. Oh my goodness, this is, maybe it is why we're all nuts. I don't know, but anyway, I hope not. But anyway, it was the analog versus digital wars. And
Yeah.
you don't even remember, people don't even think about that going on now. Everything's just so electronic and so digital. But that was, I mean, just being able to be in Philadelphia. The other great thing about at the Musical Academy when I was studying, right next door was Sigma Sound. They had three
Cool.
offices in Philadelphia. And TSOP, the Sound of Philadelphia, all those amazing musicians who would go in and out. You never really saw them. I think they'd go in back doors. So we never really mobbed them on the streets. But that was going on next door. Now, an amazing guy by the name of Jack Faith. He was a studio recorder. He would play woodwinds on a lot of the recordings there at Sigma Sounds. I actually, when I think I was in second grade. How old are you then? Maybe 7.
So
So
yeah,
my
so
dad, piano was not enough. Dad thought I should learn the clarinet. I don't know why, but he liked the clarinet. He
Well,
liked
it's
Benny Goodman.
wind. This
So
is a different
wind,
acoustic, right?
exactly.
Very
So
different.
a local music store called Shup's Music Studio
Shoops.
had
Shoops
this.
mics.
No, it wasn't Shoops. Not like not the same.
Not the
Shups.
same thing.
Not the same Shups. But Shup's Music Store is just a local music store. They had this guitar teacher who was really a woodwind player. What we call now for gigs on the outside. Playing gigs and all sorts of things. But also early into doing recording and did arranging for the Sigma Sound Studios. And he was there, again, he was much younger. He was there in this little, cramped little music store, giving lessons. So Dad had me take lessons from this guy. Well, what a lucky break. I mean, this guy, was brilliant, but here he just was teaching guitar, and eventually I got into guitar there too. I wish I had been able to stay with him. He eventually didn't teach anymore. He did, because things got really big with the studios and everything. But he and I stayed in touch over the years. He was always after me to write. He was part of the inspiration to write a manuscript program, because copywriting, when you're doing those arranging, he had excellent penmanship for that. And, he could do a chart, boom, 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 write the whole thing out. But, he was always after me, like, can you create a font that's like my handwriting? And, it was really, really cool. So that was Jack Faith. Another little claim to fame, his brother, can't remember his first name, but he was a vocal instructor, and he was the one who trained Andrea McArdle and many other later subsequent Annies in the musical Annie. And that tomorrow, that sound was really from Jack Faith's brother, who was the vocal coach to many, many performers in the Philadelphia area, some who, like Andrea McArdle, made it big. So this was again this microcosm of where I could talk to all these people. Not only that, across the street, or down the street a little bit closer to City Hall, you had the Academy of Music, where I could hear Andre Segovia, which I did numerous times. Philadelphia Orchestra, magnificent, with all the soloists and everything going on there. And these great opportunities to be able to do that. That also enriched my appreciation of sound, appreciation of acoustics, appreciation of what a room could do. The Academy of Music was really intended as an opera hall, and it was not intended as a symphony hall, and it did have problems as a symphony hall. But now they've moved to the Kimmel Center, which was built, decades later. So it was just to be there on the street. I liken it to Boston, where you have the Boston Symphony Hall and the music schools, like right down the street, of course, because the symphony players would just walk across the street to teach at the music schools. In Philadelphia, we also have the Curtis Institute of Music. And so So this microcosm of where you have music being performed and theaters and all that live music going on, and then the schools right around it where, the students, you would stand in line and they would, for $2, let you up in what we call the peanut gallery to get up
Yeah,
into the
exactly.
top. And that's, again, it's invaluable. So having that, and then the same thing with AES, just going to the AES show every other year. I mean, you just learn so much. Not only that, you
Hmm.
run into people like Rupert Neve, I mean, it's so cool, and they'll
Yeah.
talk to you, they'll stand there and talk to you. And Les Paul, I met there, and,
Wow.
all sorts of people. You just, see them walking by. Whoa, that's so cool. So, yeah.
And you have a number of papers that were published in the AES journal, and I think one of them has to do with your first master's, which was about parallel processing, right?
Yes,
So
that was very
can
interesting.
you explain to me a little bit about what this is, because this is very important for how many levels of things are going on when we're behind a digital console right now.
Oh
You
yes,
know, like,
exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
and
Yes,
I'm
so
confused.
it's so amazing, and the fact that you can now squash multiple processors on the same chip, which is, due to Moore's law, every 18 months. It's there's this halving, but also doublings too. So doubling in capacity of memory and doubling of speed, but
Right.
halving of space, and but also
Because,
there
can I
there's
ask a
power. There's
question?
also a power problem too because we're using more power now. Also, yes.
But like back when you were programming using an assembly code or something, you would have to know the chip, the CPU, you would have to kind of understand how to program that chip. And now we're kind of able to not really understand the process. Like, it's almost like you use these other, and so I'm just so fascinated to learn a little bit more about this stuff and parallel processing. And I don't want to, I know
Right,
there's
right. No,
a
no, no,
million
no.
things
That's
to
okay.
talk
That's
about.
okay. It's all good stuff. And one of the things that really strikes me is that there's the pendulum swings back and forth, and so
Mm-hmm.
you're close to the machine, and then you're far away from the machine. So originally everybody's doing stuff in binary with punch cards. My first actual computer that I programmed was the Wang calculator, which used
Wow.
cubes as the numbers. So that was the display, and you got these pre-perfed punch cards like the one Chad ones in Florida and the Bush v. Gore, and you poke the holes out. So we were literally programming in binary. You would write down your assembly code, and then you would translate your assembly instructions and the digits that you wanted to use in math. And you'd translate that into binary, and then you'd poke out the holes. And it only allowed you 80 commands, except for one of the machines that we had. This was at my high school. It had 2 card readers, so you could get a whopping 160 commands. But like
Wow.
trying to squeeze every little bite, every bit really out of, doing these things in multiple commands. So I, of course, was doing, like trying to do integration, trying to do logarithms, trying to do tangents, while
Mm-hmm.
flunking my math classes. I was getting D's in my math classes, which were all about that stuff. I would then go into
Yeah.
the room and program it. My mom had to get called in, and it's like, Rebecca, stop doing that program and work on your math. I'm like, but I'm doing the math. So
Yeah.
ultimately, I did, manage to stop getting these D's in math, but I was more interested in taking the math and programming it. So we were down
Mm-hmm.
in the bowels of it in assembly language. Then you come to compilers, so you're
Right.
actually, you're writing sentences, Fortran, C, C++, you're writing language like constructs and using things like plus and minus and parentheses to bracket things off. But then it's still translating it down into the machine code. So there's a compiler going on there. Uh,
Right.
but you're really moving farther and farther away. Now you're just clicking on a screen, and now these commands are being put together for you, and you're losing the whole concept of what's
Mm-hmm.
going on there. But that's the pendulum swinging. So it went from there all the way over to here. But now we have this miracle device called the Arduino. And
Yeah, and these.
Arduino, Say it, go ahead.
And these cards where now you can actually start to program the processor yourself again,
Yes,
which
yes.
is beautiful, which I like because that makes sense to me. Because sometimes, like with you, with mathematics, it's like, okay, I can plug in the formula, but that's not interesting. I'm interested in how to apply it and what I can do with the formula. And if I can understand how to apply it, it goes always better with word problems than just like multiple choice problems with mathematics.
Exactly. And that's, so the fact that kids are really getting into the Arduino and building stuff. And then there's the the company up in New York. It's the one with
Ada Fish?
Lady Ada. Yeah, Adafruit. Right.
Adafruit. Sorry.
That's okay. No, Adafruit. Yeah, I buy a lot of stuff from them. And Lady Ada is really great. We were trying to get her to give a talk, but so I had to email her, to ask, but she couldn't come. She was too busy, but she did email me. So I was like, okay, Lady Ada actually emailed me. Now I have a friend who actually works there at Adafruit, and all that stuff that they're doing with these little kits and just getting people interested and also keeping a women's focus. You get their weekly newsletter, which is really an ad for their latest products and stuff, but they always feature a woman, which is so super. Maybe someday she'll feature me, but that would be super cool. But it's Adafruit is a great place for people getting back to that, and then also the maker fairs. The maker fair, on hard times, but that was a cool thing where you're a maker and you're designing things. There were people there who were designing their own insulin producing machines, swirling, fluids together and creating insulin because it was so ridiculously expensive here in the United States. People were driving to Canada to get the same insulin they could get here, at ridiculously lower prices. But it just, that sort of thing. So it's swinging back. But when we swing back, we're swinging back with better processors. And so, again, getting back to this master's thesis that I wrote.
Yeah.
So what I was doing was, this is all virtual. I was doing this, I believe I was doing it on an Apple II computer, I think, because again, the time would have been maybe right for that. It was late 80s. I don't think but then I got into Mac. Notable software, my company, we were Apple certified developers. So, so we got early Macs, and so I was an early Mac user as well. But anyway, but this simulation was really a simulation. I don't even know why I came up with this idea, but it was a simulation of, I think it was 128 microprocessors. Oh, it was RISC. That's why I got into it. RISC and CISC. Okay, RISC and CISC. RISC is reduced instruction set computer, and CISC is complex instruction set computer. So there was this sort of war going on as chips were shrinking and people were putting more instructions on them. It was getting more and more complicated to do the compilers into, this complicated assembly language. I mean, it doesn't really go through to the assembly language, it just did the binary. But there was all these instructions, and they were different lengths, and so there was this sort of novel idea of, let's go back to making the instruction set really simple. Again, people weren't programming it in binary or in assembly language, but the compilers were. The compilers had to translate it, and if it was translating this complicated thing, with 64-bit words, that you had to then, make sure you got those words broken up so they were being sent around, the pipelines correctly. This was all getting really crazy. So the idea of RISC, reduced instruction set computers, or chips really, but you can think of it as whole computers because people were making whole computers like that, was becoming into fashion. So I was fascinated by that. I attended a few talks, didn't understand a word of the talks, but I started learning about it. Oh, and by the way, that's a word of advice. Go to talks you do not understand. I would tell people, they're like, I didn't understand this, I'm never coming back here ever again. I'm like, no, that's the idea. You understood the first 5 sentences. Next time you might understand the first 5 minutes of it. So just going to talks that I didn't understand and then going back and doing research and trying to learn about these interesting technologies. So I was fascinated by RISC. And what I did was I simulated 120, it was all running on a serial computer. But the idea was the simulation was showing data moving around in a network between these simple instruction set computers. So they each had their own code, and this was just a program that I that I wrote, but it simulated. There was a bigger machine called the connection machine, and that actually did have 120. I think later they had 256. It was always a binary number because, again, the number of connections you can make. So, so the I mean binary. I mean power 2 number. So the so it was sort of simulating what a connection machine was actually literally doing with 128 processors. But basically, you know, it just sat there grinding out the numbers. And then on the screen, I could see the processors and I could see which one was getting the message. And then I would break a connection. So I would type in, you know, that this connection between these two processors is now broken. So now my program had to figure out the route around that to get to the processor it needed to go to.
So you've changed the algorithm, so to speak.
No, the algorithm was the same. It was
the algorithm stays the same.
It's just the same way networks work.
The threshold.
The way networks work is that, you know, if the network between New York and Philadelphia is broken, you know, well, if it's an oil pipeline, well, then you're host. But, you know, or like that big continental, you know, water pipeline thing colonial water pipeline problem between Louisiana and New Jersey, that, you know, if a physical pipeline breaks, if you don't have another alternate route, you're out of luck. But whereas with a network of electrical connections, if you break some of these, then the network, if the software knows enough, it can go around that break and it can find another path. Obviously, if you isolate a node, it's not going to have any paths to get to it. But if you knock out a few branches, you know, a few of the connectors, the network will figure it out. This is the way that networks actually work, electronic networks. So they reconfigure themselves. So you'll see a message that you're sending. If you ever follow the paths in your email, you can get like the whole dump of all the nodes it went through and stuff like that. And you can look at that on your computer also. You know, there's some, you know, various Unix tools that allow you, you know, or now Linux tools that allow you to monitor where things are actually going or coming from. And so that's what I was doing. But I was simulating this. But the other thing about this was all software. It was just all software. So I'd write this program, get it to work, and then I would, you know, manually type in, okay, this node is gone, this node is, you know, or not the node is gone, the connection. These connections are gone. And I would see how long and how did my algorithm figure out how to get to where it needed to route. That's what we call routers, routing the path between these networks. Now, what I was doing was that I was also using novel, unusual interconnectivity. So I was using, one of them was called the hypercube. So this is,
can I just ask a really basic question? Sorry, I'm not the greatest computer scientist. So there's this architecture of the hypercube, or like wherever these formulas kind of that you're programming information to be transmitted and received essentially in. Can you kind of just explain the basic? I don't know if this is going way too
understand it. Other people will not understand it too. And then how it wound up in an AES paper is interesting.
Yeah.
So imagine you just have two nodes, okay?
Yeah. So one to one kind of to.
They're just one wire, okay?
One wire.
So they only need one port on each node to transfer information. So it's sort of like my USB cable between that and my microphone. So my USB cable and my microphone are just one to one, okay? So it just needs that one cable, okay? So again, this is all virtual. It's just all in digits and in the way I wrote the software. So now imagine you add a third node. Okay, so you add a third node. So which ways can we connect? We can connect from here to here, and we can connect from here to here, okay? But
we could also go the other way.
And we can also go from here to here, okay?
Yeah.
So how many ports do we really need, okay? If we're going to connect from here to here, imagine that's a hard wire. That's a fixed wire, So we
Mhm.
need another port to connect from here to here. So all these microprocessors have to be exactly identical. We're
Yeah.
not going to mix them up. We're going to all use the same microprocessor, which again is just in code in my program. So, but we need two ports. So we have, let's say, port A and port B. But you notice that it's symmetrical because port A and port B will, you know, be able to get us anywhere that we need to go. Okay.
Mhm.
So now, let's say we add a fourth node. Okay. So now, if we want it to be fully connected, we have to have three connectors, right? Because we've got this one, this one, this one, this one. And so if we want to go here and here and here, we could go that route or we could go direct.
Yeah.
Okay? But every port you add is expensive. So again,
Yeah.
back to the three ones, in two steps we can get to here, and in two steps we can get, one step we can get to here. So if we still only have one connection, can we do it? No, we still need we still need two
Still need
because
two.
it's a triangle. We still need two. But in the four node one, we still need two in that one. But in the four node one, we can actually, I haven't thought about this in a really long time, but in the four node one, in two steps, in a maximum of two steps, you can get to any node from any other node. Okay?
Mhm.
So that's fine. So we consider that optimal. So you're reducing the number of wires and you're reducing the number of ports because you don't want, as you're getting a bigger network, you don't want to have, if you want to connect to a million things, you can't have a million ports on your microprocessor. It's going to be too expensive. So you want to minimize the number of ports that you will have on your microprocessor and also the number of wires, but also optimize the number of steps it takes for you to get from here to there. And that's what my thing was simulating. So, for example, we had the four nodes and the four wires, okay, and just two ports on each of them. But let's say we break this one. So, if I want to send a message from here to here, instead of going directly because it's broken, I now have to go in three hops, but I can still get there. And so it's a less than optimal, but I still have preserved the network, the integrity of the network.
Mhm.
See where I'm heading with this?
I do. Yeah. Thank
Now,
you.
if I break two things, so if I break any two, now I've disconnected the network from each other. You see how that happens? Because if I break this one, this guy is now isolated. If I break this one and this one, I've now got two parallel networks, but they can't talk to each other. And so that was what this master's thesis was all about. And it was great. I would just run the program, sit there watching the lights blinking on the thing because, I created this, it used some randomness to decide where it was going to go. I didn't know where it was going to go. I'm like, oh, whoa, it's going all the way over there. Now it's coming back all the way over here, So it was cool. It was fun. And, this was really fascinating to me. But what I realized was that the hypercube is it's a arrangement of connectivity. That connection machine connected their processors in a hypercube fashion, where the degree of the hypercube, so if it's a second degree hypercube, you have two ports. And if it's a third degree hypercube, you need three ports. But you can still preserve the connectivity with only three ports. But even though you're having some breaks, you'll still be able to preserve the connectivity. It doesn't break down until you have, too many breaks, or, if you have breaks around, one processor and that one's out. But that was what I realized with what you could do with the hypercube was that the degree of the hypercube, so you connect a two-dimensional hypercube is the flat, is basically the flat thing. So, then they have two ports. The three-dimensional, but you can keep going with the two-dimensional hypercube, and then there's the three, so you can add two-dimensional hypercubes to other two-dimensional hypercubes. But then you can go into the three-dimensional hypercube, which has a different way of doing the connectivity, and then you only need three ports, and you still have the optimal way of doing that. You check the paper. I have some diagrams in there. I mean, it would take us another hour to explain the whole thing. But that was the idea, and I thought, wow, wouldn't this be really cool if we could do this. I was looking at it for like music generation. What if we?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, I have some questions like what is this cellular automata and this Mandelbrot set that causes the fractals, and like, sorry if we're like a little bit all over the place, but it's just so fascinating. Like, can we use these like fractals to actually generate music?
Generate music. Okay,
yeah.
So what you're looking at behind me is actually, this is a real cathedral in New York, and this was an art installation that was not intended to be fractal or whatever, but it was just an art thing. But it does, since we're talking about the fractals, it's actually a great backdrop because it does the fractal nature of things happens in the way that our nerve system sort of has these branches and branches on branches, and you can think of it like a tree. So when you look at a tree, it's coming up, and then at some point it splits, and then those split, and they're splitting. But if they all split in a binary way, your trees would look really stupid. Just split, they'd be systematic, and it would be a problem because, and that's why your trees don't split this way, because the genetics learned that if we made them all this symmetric, then they're much more easily blown over by the wind and things like that, because they're just too symmetric. The fact that they're asymmetric and random things are sort of happening as they grow, and creatures like cicadas are biting into them and creating new pathways, that actually is good. The reason why we have those crazy cicadas, coming out in usually prime number years, 17 year cicadas that we just had, those cicadas are actually helping the tree to survive by snacking on them while they're doing their breeding thing. So things are not perfectly binary splits or even trinary splits. So the idea of creating a fractal basically came out of computer graphics, where they were trying to model things like water ripples and clouds in the sky, and terrain and trees, and plants and things like that. And so they came up with this sort of way of making it a little bit less precise, so it's not always division by particular numbers or things like that. And then it looks more natural, but it's still not natural, because fractals even are not the exact way that the world works. The world, they've got cicadas, so there's other interfering things that come along. And the Mandelbrot set, these are all from computer graphics. Oh, I should tell you that my professor at University of Pennsylvania, so I was at Drexel University, which is directly across, a lot of places are directly across the street for reasons. Directly across the street from the University of Pennsylvania. Both have long histories. Penn's is a little bit longer than Drexel's. But anyway, I after finishing my master's degree, I went applied for and attended the School of Engineering at the University of Pennsylvania. And I was thinking, because I was working on parallel processing, that's what I was really doing in my master's thesis and in that paper for the AES. But it turned out that when I arrived at the University of Pennsylvania, the entire, except for one person, parallel processing department had been denied tenure because the University of Pennsylvania did not think that it was a useful venue. Parallel processing did not think it was a fruitful avenue of research, of academic research. So one guy stayed behind, really great guy, but basically they had no department of parallel processing anymore by the time I arrived there. So what was the next best thing? I was interested in graphics. So I joined the computer graphics department with Professor Norm Badler, who I'd already known from attending talks and meeting with him. And he was actually one of the original founders of SIGGRAPH, the computer graphics show, which is sort of, to computer graphics, the analogy to the AES show for audio engineers. And all the big Disney, everybody, they're all there at the SIGGRAPH show. And so I went with his department. I was working on computer graphics, and that was what I was doing originally there. How I wound up in voting machines is a whole another long story. You can read that all. But yeah, anyway, so So the Mandelbrot set, let me just finish up this one thought. The Mandelbrot set was a thing of computer graphics. And
Mm-hmm.
so because I was thinking about graphics at that point in time when I was writing the AES paper based on my dissertation, which I had defended the year before, that's where I came up with these ideas about using graphics to make the sound more interesting. Again, it turns out, yeah, the Mandelbrot set is great for making self-similar things and for doing infinite recursions.
Yeah,
That's where you
that's
loop on itself. But no, we know that when you put a microphone up against, when you put a microphone up against a speaker, you get feedback, or you get in Zoom, you get the blah 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 blah, the repetitive thing where you got this echo loop going on. So it doesn't work in audio. It doesn't work in audio engineering. And I don't think it necessarily works in music composition either. But people were writing some music based on those things. But anyway, back to your question.
But what did work is this whole original idea of sampling things and taking something like, now we go in and we take an impulse response of a cathedral and we can kind of recreate that room from that impulse response.
Absolutely.
And this is a part of your work that I wanted to touch on, that's audio forensics. And another one of these hidden audio fields that like when I first started doing audio, I was like in a bar and I thought that the console and the speakers were everything. And then I actually rebuilt a console and realized like, oh my goodness, what are these components? And then now it's digital and it's like, oh, how have we modeled this capacitor at this stage in its life to make a sound or something.
Right.
So I really want to get back into this whole.
Exactly. And that's why everybody is bowing to Rupert Neve and the original people who were doing these things, Les Paul with coming up with reverb and, just amazing early things. And there were other groups in the UK doing this as well. And so yeah, what's interesting about all of that and tying it back into audio forensics and again, yes. So I have many obsessions. One of them was with the Kennedy assassination. I actually wrote a paper on that in the 7th grade. That was only 4 years after the Kennedy.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I wrote a paper about that, saying that it was a conspiracy theory. Of course, my junior high school history teacher gave me a D for that. Later, he apologized some years later. But anyway, I remember, again, as a decade or 2 decades later, I attended an AES show talk that it's like the Kennedy assassination, audio analysis of it. So it was a fantastic talk about there was the fact, and we knew this at the time, there was a motorcycle police officer who was, I believe, on the bridge, one of the bridges overlooking that the Kennedy car went under, I believe. And he was overlooking this entire scene that was going on in Dallas, Texas. And for some reason, his mic got stuck on, like it jammed. And so all of this sound went back, which they recorded back at the police headquarters. And so they have this whole thing, what sounds perhaps like gunshots or perhaps like gunshot echoes, so all of this and these people, got a hold of the tapes and so there was this panel session of analyzing this. There was a name for that. Was it called the Dictabel? I think it was called the Dictabel, or it might have even recorded onto an electronic tape or so, electronic wire. But I think it was called a Dictabel for some reason. Maybe it was even on his motorcycle. But in any event, there was this Dictabel. I hope I'm remembering that correctly. That they had these recordings, and so again, fairly primitive, but they were able to hear all these other sounds, and the speakers who were analyzing it from a point of forensics, trying to mock up the sounds that would be heard at that location. Now that plaza has been largely reconstructed, so you really can't get the same sounds there. But at that time, it was still relatively intact, and there have been numerous analyses of where the sounds may have bounced off of. and then comparing that to the tape, and the various delays of different sounds that were being heard. And that was it for me. I thought that was amazingly fantastic. But who was hiring people to do that? Not really too many people, like in the planet, were doing that. So
Yeah.
it was when Notable Software, when we were doing our, we were a software company, and we would write programs, paid for hire programs, and then we also did our own stuff in computer music and video games and stuff for the Apple IIs and stuff like that. But because I wanted to get people to hire us to do projects, I just had an ad in the Yellow Pages, which you don't even have. There's a virtual Yellow Pages, but actual books that had Yellow Pages, and you could look up, forensics. So I didn't have myself listed under forensics. I had myself listed under computer consultant. So Notable Software was there, and I get this phone call from a woman who was a criminal defense attorney in Trenton for the public defender's office in New Jersey. And she asked me if I could take a floppy disk and undelete deleted files on it. And like, oh yeah, of course I can. Because again, as a computer scientist, I knew that those bits were still there, and also knew that when I deleted files accidentally, or maybe inadvertently, or because there was a problem on the disk, a scratch or something like that, or some dust, that I could write software that would actually read the binary zeros and ones, electronically converted, and then reassemble the files. So I said, yeah, I can do that. There was no software, there was no commercial software. Now, the forensics people all have things like, they just have a whole bunch of tools that do that, Encase and what's it called? I forget the name of a couple of them. FTK, Forensic Toolkit, and then there's ones for Unix/Linux, and there's a whole bunch of them out there. Some of them are free, and they're very good, and others you pay many thousands of dollars. And then for phones, they have a lot of work is done in forensics in Israel, and there's a company called Celebrate that do basically the top end cell phone forensics. A new phone comes out, they're on it, and they've already got it cracked. So so I got this call, just this random call. Can you write software to do that? I'm like, I already have the software to do it. So just come over there, and then oh my goodness, hundreds of floppy disks, and we didn't even have. There were no DVDs. There was no DVD ROMs. It didn't exist. So this was again, sort of mid '80s, early '90s, and no, that case. I'm sorry. That forensics case was 1998. So, but I'm talking about, there, people really were still just using floppy disks, and there was, other types of it was basically like mag tape, but, stuff like that to record digital data. So I basically was deployed for a few months doing work trying to recover evidence in this murder case. And it was fascinating. So this was in 1998, and then I was like, well, I look for other forensics cases. So that's when I started to add forensics to Notable Software. And then it was during the time when I was up at Radcliffe Institute. I was fortunate to be able to apply there. It's harder to get into Radcliffe Institute than it is to get into Harvard as a student.
Where you've also taught, correct? You've actually taught at Harvard?
No, I did not teach.
But you're an honorary alumni?
An honorary alumni. But when you do your Radcliffe Institute year, you're doing research for an entire year. And then you are permanently, you're always considered a Radcliffe fellow. So it's a fellowship year. And then you receive an honorary at the end of the year. You're an honorary Harvard alumna. So I get all the Harvard, alumni association things, and sometimes even attend their end of the year celebration. I did it this year virtually. they had Melinda Gates was receiving the gold medal of the Radcliffe Institute this year. So that was fascinating. So anyway. It was during that year. It's supposed to be a pivot year. Now we talk a lot about pivot during COVID. But in many people's careers, there are pivot times. And I was running Notable Software, but I was also teaching over at Bryn Mawr College. And I took a year sabbatical from Bryn Mawr College. The question was I going to go back, or was I going to go somewhere else, continue teaching, or just do Notable Software, So while I was there, I just kept thinking about forensics a lot. And I kept thinking, I really liked the few jobs that I got, since that first murder case. They were all fascinating. And I really wanted to explore that. And that was 2004 to 2005, the Radcliffe Fellowship year. And in 2004, the field of digital forensics or computer forensics actually became a field. Up to then, it was not an official field. I mean, it still hardly barely is, because there's not that many degree programs in it. People just take courses for the most part. But I realized that I really wanted to do that work, and I wanted to try to do it full time. So again, it was a pivotal type of situation where I looked at my bank accounts and I said, I have enough money in there. I can live for a year and not be hurting myself, if I get no work. But let's see if I get work. And I did. So it was really an opportunity. I took a risk. And, I wasn't going to go broke at the end of the year, but I was, it was a calculated risk. And then I might have gone back to teaching on it, but no, it was great. I really enjoyed doing digital forensics, and I did do a number of audio forensics cases, but I always sort of hark back to that initial, because it was listening to those forensics people who, forensic audio was really just, sort of a new type of thing as well. But listening to them and how did they sort of go through, what was their method to try to figure out, where these sounds were coming from. But I also do that in digital forensics. I have an eye for detail. I like a lot of detail. I can absorb a lot of detail. And somehow my brain, again, maybe that two brain thing combined, has a way of condensing it. And sometimes I can really, a lot of times, I really hone in on, whoa, this thing doesn't make sense. This sort of sticks out. And it's popping out at me. And that's where I find lines of investigation that I look for with regard to what's really going on here. Okay, the cops have their story, the prosecutor has their story, the defendant has their story. I always say the story is all of their stories. It's not one of their stories.
Yeah, it's multi-narrative.
It's all of them. It's all of them. And I have to be able to come up with my own narrative. Exactly, great word. To try to explain what's really going on there, but also in a way that I could explain it to the benefit of my client. So a couple of audio cases that I had, one in particular was this extraordinarily paranoid guy who thought that crazy things were going on in his house. And, who knows? I mean, he
this
didn't
audio pareidolia, right? Like when your brain thinks that it's hearing voices in the static.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. All of this. So he was planning, and I think he thought maybe his wife was having an affair. And I mean, it was bizarro. And so he was planning all these little digital recorders, So this was maybe about 8 or 10 years ago. He's planning these digital recorders all over his house, and then he's bringing me these, and he's like, okay, I did this recording. So then, so I just used Audacity. I mean, it's free, and it works great. So I just would take the feed into Audacity and then expand it, and look at it, and he's like, oh, I can hear she's a man's voice, and she's talking to this man. No, it was the dog barking. It was and then there was a doorbell ringing, and somebody left a package. I mean, it was so funny. And then there was this vibration. Yeah, it was the heater had gone on. And it was, so this guy was just totally, I had a reason for every single one of those sounds. Finally, he just had to say, okay, yeah, I guess we can't really. I mean, he was ready to get a divorce, but
Yeah.
I never found out what happened to him. But there was two other incidents which were very interesting. One was a case that again I got through through an attorney who had Notable Software now has a lot of ads in legal databases and stuff like that. So random attorneys will call me, or sometimes it's referrals from other attorneys. And Notable is more than just me. I hire in other people if it's something over my head, or if I just want additional help, or just want other eyes on the thing. So I have multiple different people that are the Notables. But anyway, so this was a police officer. He was very high ranking, and he was it was basically, the idea was that he being framed with regard to conversations that were being recorded. So there was
Mm-hmm.
another police officer who was having conversations with him that ordinarily wouldn't have been recorded, but the other guy was recording his half of the conversation, and then these were being used to try to, it was believed, frame this guy, that he was taking bribes, that he was getting televisions or appliances or whatever, to do certain favors or things like that. And so
Mm-hmm.
we got the recordings. And the question was, are these recordings end-to-end recordings, or have they been spliced? And one of the things we know is that when we talk, we use these, like grunts or ahas, or they call them verbal tics, and we put
Yeah.
like I say, a lot. You'll hear that 4,000 times in this regard. So the idea is that if your verbal tic is something like a yeah or you're not giving your consent to that. You're That's just your verbal tic. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're agreeing to something, that requires a little bit more than that. And sort of an analysis of this guy's speech characteristics, but also an analysis of the digital stream of this recording. And again, threw it into Audacity and just expanded it just to where you could see individual things. And you can almost always now, again, with Pro Tools, you can make a much nicer splice where you don't see the splice. But back
Oh,
in the
okay.
day, you would see that splice. That splice was evident. So if somebody took a verbal tic, a yeah or a and put it into, a stream that where it didn't belong, you'd see that. You would see that get planted in there. You'd actually see, the break in where the splice was, because people were just grabbing a sound, and with a regular analog recorder, you just clip it out. But with the
Mm-hmm.
digital sound, you would just take it, plunk it in over there, but nobody knew to roll it off or anything. People are going to listen to it. They're never going to look at it, but I was looking at it and saw that it was spliced. Sadly, that was not sufficient to help this poor guy. But yeah. So anyway, that was a very interesting case, and I practically fell off the chair. I had a colleague working with me. He's also an audio engineer, and we were both looking at it, and we're like, "Whoa!" It was really exciting to actually see that. And then there was one other example where so a lot of times police officers are recording themselves, or they're recording stuff. So a lot of times, if they're doing a online investigation, they've got their computer on, they've got their monitor on, and they're recording like the screenshot of it. Like we're with Zoom, you're recording this whole thing right now.
Yeah.
So you're recording, but again, primitive. Let's go back a decade. So more primitive recording of of a video, or transactions that are going on the screen, of sort of police monitoring an IP address, looking at all of the incoming and outgoing messages from an IP address. And they're recording that whole thing because they're going to use all that as evidence. This was connected to this, then this happened, blah, 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 blah. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so they're looking at that. So they're recording that, but they forgot that their video recorder also had an audio recorder built in, and it was recording their audio as they were talking to each other in the room about this very case. And not only that, but the attorney who was working on this case, who I was working for, he actually called them during this thing, and you hear the conversation. He remembered it because I'm like, look, they recorded this whole conversation and this whole thing, and they were talking to me. We couldn't hear his side of the conversation, but he remembered the conversation. He even had in his logbook that's when it had occurred. They didn't realize they had recorded their own conversation. And these cops were talking about drop drives. They're saying, well, we can just go to the guy's house and leave some drop drives. Nobody's going to know. And, then the other cops will pick them up and it'll have evidence on it. I was like, whoa. And so, yeah, I'm sorry to say, I'm saying Blue Lives Matter, but, I'm also saying, sometimes there are some weird things. I mean, these both really involved law enforcement. But, yeah, this was, I could not believe what I had heard on that. And it was there loud and clear. And, we had a transcript of it. So, again, I can't really talk about the outcome of that case. But that was... Yeah. That's fascinating. It's very fascinating. And that's why when I get evidence, if it has audio, I'm going to listen to it. And, sometimes the attorney I'm working for, they want to cut costs. They're like, you don't have to watch this whole video. I'm like, I'll do other work while I'm doing multitask. But I want to hear it. I really want to hear it. There's a lot of interesting things that go on in these recorded interviews and confessions and things like that. So
and again, just like, just so much information that we're getting from the audio world that we wouldn't be getting just from a visual take. Like it just reminds me of that movie from I think it's the 80s with John Travolta with the blowout, and it's this editing guy, and he's like, no, the tire blew out, but before that there was a gunshot, and it's like, that was my first introduction to the
right
to
exactly.
that it even existed, right?
Yeah, exactly. And those types of things, I mean, these movies do bear some resemblance to reality, and to me it's those types of interactions, and and looking at that, I like watching forensics files, because they are all about solving cases using forensics, and they sometimes will get into an audio thing, but there's all sorts of things, shoe prints, they sometimes do some digital stuff, and it really was a case where people were undeleting files, where they actually were able to solve a crime, that the forensic people were undeleting files and were able to identify who the person was that solved a crime. That really launched digital forensics into being an actual field. But these fields are relatively new because we haven't had the opportunity to record stuff. But look at Black Lives Matter. I mean, wow, what a completely different outcome that would have been had those people not been recording from all of those different angles, both the audio and the video. So it's so important, and and then the work to actually create that into a narrative, and also the insurrection. So all of that, what really went on, the recordings from the multicams and, the body cams. The body cams, the interesting thing about the body cams is they don't accidentally come off. They're taken off. They don't accidentally shut off. They're shut off. I mean, that's also...
And that speaks a ton. Just that, like...
Yes. So, okay, accidents happen. Yeah, and so it's a fascinating world, and I enjoy, being a part of it. I did write a chapter in a book about forensics that was about image forensics, and that's again harking back to my work at the graphics lab at UPenn.
What book is that?
It's called it's in my CV. I think the book is called Digital Image Forensics.
Okay.
And I have a chapter there. About that. So there's it always comes back around. Everything comes back around. I don't know if it's for a reason or maybe I make it.
So we're getting to, it's about 11 a.m. here, so I don't want to take up your whole day, and I absolutely, we have to talk about, speaking of coming back around, we really do need to talk about the More radio project, and maybe even before that, your work with David Sarnoff do I pronounce his name right? The radio club, and I'm
David
assuming
Sarnoff, yeah.
Sarnoff, and so I'm assuming there's a huge RCA connection there, because David Sarnoff like created this one to many, right? This topology that we use in networking and interfacing digital systems all the time. So it's just I have to can we talk about this stuff?
Absolutely. Okay, so I'll give you this brief synopsis history of that. So again, I was working at the David Sarnoff Research Center of RCA Labs in Princeton, and DSRC was our initials. And the David Sarnoff Radio Club has DSRC as our initials. So it was the in-house radio club. But back in the day, people, and even still today, people use amateur radio for emergencies. And they deployed when there was a big broadcast union strike. And so those people who had advanced, high enough radio licenses, or even the commercial license, they were all sent out to New York, California. We need you working in the broadcast, stations, because all of our regular people, our employees, are on strike, and we got to keep things on the air. So it was always encouraged to get your radio license when you were there, and then we had classes and things like that. And so that's where I got my initial novice license, and then worked my way up to technician, and later Tech Plus and General, and now I'm an extra. So I've gone through most of the different categories to the top one in amateur radio. And so emergency is extremely useful. When the Twin Towers went down in New York on 9/11, what was on one of the towers? The broadcast towers. All of those antennas, they all collapsed. We watched it on TV. It all collapsed. And then those stations went off the air. I'm like clicking through stations. I'm like, why is 11 not working? What happened to 7? I'm on my cable. Where did they go? And that was it. Tragic. But so what did they do? They switched to the Empire State Building. There is antennas up there still active, but that was it. They didn't have enough to run all the channels through there. So they went to the Armstrong antenna that still exists across the Hudson River, and enormous antenna, and that was used deployed into emergency service. Or we would have really had a lot of problems with communications. But the radio operators were deployed for that emergency, and we usually go to the Red Cross. So I went to the Red Cross in Princeton, and our David Sarnoff Radio Club members worked there for days. We hope there would be messages to relay about the people who were being recovered, but sort of like the Florida thing. Not too many people were recovered. Oh, there's some were. But it was, so that's what we were using it for. And that's why the David Sarnoff aspect of working at the Sarnoff Center really included sort of this radio component. But David Sarnoff himself, and whether the story is somewhat apocryphal or not, he was among the people, maybe not the first one, as has been said, but he was among the people in New York working. I think he was working for at the Wanamaker's building or something up there, where they received ship-to-shore communications on Morse code. This was practically brand new. So he was receiving, signals and others there when they heard. We didn't have SOS then. SOS came after the Titanic, but when they heard messages that the Titanic had been hit, and then also radio messages from other ships that were converging on the Titanic to try to rescue people. And so David Sarnoff, he was a radio operator doing, had his headset on and doing his Morse code. And he worked his way up all the way through, the hierarchies, GE and all of this stuff, and then eventually split off to become RCA. So the David Sarnoff Research Center, which was built, I believe, in the 60s, he did have an office there. He had offices in New York, of course, and he was the president of RCA for a long time. Unfortunately, he left it to his son, who was not such a great engineer or a great business person, and he managed to run the company somewhat into the ground. So it was unfortunate. But anyway, that was where the radio history was with the David Sarnoff Radio Club. I heard it was toward the end of last year, maybe after Thanksgiving of last year, through again some good connections, that there was a group out in California called the ARDC, Amateur Radio Digital Communications Group. And this group actually was very shrewd at the early days of the internet when IP addresses were being given out. You could buy whole gobs of them. I mean, they didn't cost that much. So if you buy a high number of IP addresses or a block of those, you have a lot of IP addresses. And those are worth a lot of money now. Well, they just sat on them. These were supposed to be used for amateur radio purposes. But how many amateur radio people are really doing digital communication? I mean, we do digital communication, but we do them, in digital modes on the air and stuff. So it would be nice to have some channels, but we don't need as much as AT&T or, some Verizon or some of these other companies. We don't need that many. So shrewdly, as the prices were just going crazy, they decided to sell a bunch of them. And I don't know how much money they got, but basically they turned it into a foundation, and they're having these grants, which are intended for amateur radio, because they wanted the money all to be going to further amateur radio. So people told me, look, you know all about this stuff, why not propose a grant? So I proposed this project, which I wound up naming the MORE project, Make Operating Radio Easier project, okay? And the idea of it, it's very ambitious. We have 2 years to do it. We're only at the very beginning, because the grant got finalized in June, is to have 500 new amateur radio operators licensed within the 2-year period, and to have 50% of them be non-male and 60% of them, and it can overlap, be youth between the ages of 12 and 18. And the idea is the amateur radio, like engineering, like STEM subjects, suffers from this lack of role models and lack, of getting people involved in, as youth, because it's STEM. You get involved in youth, you're going to be, many amateur radio operators go into engineering when they get into college, or computer science. So, they get it and they do it. But if you're not a woman, if you're a woman or non-male in, even non-binary, but if you're not, mainstream, and you're as the other amateur radio operators are, there's not a lot of young voices, there's not a lot of high-pitched voices, and so you tend to get shunned. You get called a YL, young lady, even if you're my age, because my voice is still high. And you need to have more women. We need more mentors. We need,
Absolutely.
We just need it. Just like the SoundGirls. We need this type of thing. And so that's the idea of it. Of course, we're going to, as part of the project, train people who are, traditional as well, parents, teachers, other people who we can further into it. But the idea is to just have this influx and see if we can really affect the population and what happens to these students and women going forward, non-males going forward. What happens? Are they on the radio? So it's not just, in amateur radio, they call it a ham-cramming exam. It in a school for 2 days, and you memorize the 424 answers to the 424 questions that could potentially be on a 35-question exam, and you learn something about E equals IR and the difference between a resistor and a capacitor, and then you get your license. So, but this is not that. We really want them to understand the material, and it's a very important part. You can get your license, but if you never get on the air and you never actually operate, your chance of staying in it long term, you might continue to renew your license, or maybe not even that. But if you don't get on the air and you don't find that fun of getting on the air, talking to Japan, like you were saying.
Yeah, the practice of it.
Yes, if you don't get that excitement and thrill of doing that, you probably won't stay in it. So part of the funds that we're getting is really for the equipment. They'll have equipment. They'll each get a radio, just a 2-meter, what we call HT handheld, but it gets lots of channels. It can be programmed using a computer, and they'll have that, and we'll help them do that, what we call the go to get on the air part of the project. And so that's what the More project is really all about. So yeah.
I mean, I just think it's the perfect way to learn about so many fundamentals about audio engineering. Like even when I go out and I've got to coordinate maybe like 30 or 40 wireless mics, this is radio technology.
Yes,
like this is all coming, and so to go and to learn the basics, like it just seems like, I wish I did it that way. I've done things kind of backwards.
Right.
Like,
you got your wireless antennas, they're pointing the wrong way. You got interference, you've got some strong channels elsewhere, Yeah, you have to know all that stuff now because, again, it's just going in all that direction nowadays. And yeah, for the audio engineer, I really strongly encourage you, no matter how long you've been in audio engineering, get your ham radio license. It's lots of fun, and get on the air. It's really super great.
I'm so looking forward to mine, and I need to, there's lots of studying that I still feel I need. Like, okay, do I know exactly what part of the spectrum this is in? Like when I'm doing FM radio, this is part of it's ultra high frequency range, isn't it?
Right.
And then shortwave is like, well, it's actually shortwave. And then one of the other things that I was going to talk about earlier is like, even just when we're thinking about FM synthesis and like, recreating a digital sound on a keyboard that's never even existed before, like this goes back to like FM synthesis, but so how do I not confuse that with FM frequency modulation?
Well, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. You're feeding one wave into another wave, and it's modulating that wave. So frequency modulation. So it is actually doing that. But it's, but again, depending on what frequency you want, so, and how you're going to do that. And then, and then there's amplitude modulation. So there's all these different technologies, but you learn about all of that when you go through your test. But not only that, you learn about how to bounce signals off the moon. I mean, there's all these people go out to the moon, they're saying, these billionaires want to go to the moon. So, we got to get our signals up there. I mean, people originally thought when the first moon bounce occurred by the U.S. military during World War II, they were afraid that by bouncing a signal off the moon, it would blow up the moon. And it's a good thing it didn't, because we would all be dead because we have no tides and everything. So, but this people didn't know. They had no idea. But they didn't know what a sound wave would do. Would it cause vibrations in the moon and, cause it to blow up. So yeah, all these types of things. But yeah, the more you know about any of these types of things, you had a bunch of interesting digital questions about that. We'll maybe get back to that someday. But yes, all of this, and that's why I think the More project is so good. So, they basically just go to N2RE, November 2 Romeo Echo.org. That's the David Sarnoff Radios Club website, or just type in David Sarnoff Radio Club website. And there's a tab over on the right-hand side called the More Project. And, just send me an email. You can read more about it there and find out more about it. I know we have to really run, but you did have two good questions at the very end, which I did want to answer on your last page. So you had written down, this was in your section called, or you can read them.
Is there anyone else we should interview? Yes. Are you thinking about that? So is there anybody else we should interview for the SoundGirls Living History Project?
Yes, and I don't know who you've recorded so far, but Laurie Anderson is she's a super great gal, and just all the stuff she does, with her art and everything. But she is very super knowledgeable. And I call them the two Lauries. I assume they might even know each other. Who knows? But Laurie Spiegel. Yes, I met her along the way. She in '84, again, at the same time I was at RCA Labs, she was at AT&T Bell Labs working under Max Matthews. And we had numerous exchanges at conferences, so I think even some of the AES conferences. And there's a 1984 YouTube interview of her. And you should definitely get in touch with her. She knows who I am. If you get in touch with her, send my regards. I also think Wendy Carlos, if you haven't recorded, somebody's got it. get Wendy.
Somebody does need to do that.
That
actually.
was super. I mean, I was so choked up I couldn't even say anything. But Wendy Carlos walked right past me in an AES exhibit hall, and I couldn't say anything. I was like, oh my goodness, it's Wendy Carlos. So that was super cool. And definitely Wendy Carlos, and then Diana Deutsch, who spoke
Absolutely
at AES, and she was a big influence on my knowledge. I think maybe I might have met her at an AES, but we don't really know each other very well. But Diana was a very big influence on me in the field of psychoacoustics. And if you can get all four of those great people who are definitely qualified to be sound girls.
Definitely
sound girls.
Her talk on audio illusions, I think it's actually online too, like part of a different presentation that wasn't just for this AES, but that scale illusion is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I have that in one of my papers, an RCA paper. And yeah, her stuff is just amazing. And there was a whole issue of the AES. You can find it. AES had been reprinting it for a while in hard copy, but you can download it all. There was a whole issue involving Diana and all of her, psychoacoustic stuff. There was a whole issue of the AES journal back when the covers were red before they went to blue. So that's when you can date them. But yeah, I think. Yeah, all of her stuff was fantastic, and I think that and then at the end of that talk was her new stuff, which I was not aware of. So yeah, anybody who, even if you're familiar with her stuff, you definitely catch that. And then you had one last question for me.
Yeah. So is there anything else you'd like to mention that we didn't cover in this?
So this is my opportunity to say thank you to AES, and I really feel a little choked up about that actually. I've appreciated being a member of AES to the point that I'm now a senior member, so I never have to pay any more dues, and I can attend all the conferences for free everywhere. Wonderful. So it's really wonderful, and AES has just been such an important part of my life. But the thing about AES is that they appreciate their gray beards or gray hairs. We don't have beards. They appreciate the people who are the founders, like Harry Olson and Diane, and people who are doing all of these early things. I bring back retrospectives about it. But the AES is different from many of the other groups, like the same length of time IEEE, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and the Association of Computing Machinery, ACM. Those groups have pretty much not opened up to youth. I mean, yeah, they have their college chapters and stuff, but their conferences are not free or $35, for anybody who can make it to New York City and go to the Javits Center. I mean, just seeing that AES just took that on. AES was going down in membership, but they just took the bull by the horns and they just opened it up. And boy, what a dramatic change it's been. And with SoundGirls, and with the WHAM project, and giving them free booths, free. You can be there and give out your buttons and your cards and stuff. And it just, that spirit in AES, that is audio. I mean, that is the whole field of audio. It's what's coming up that's new, relying on the old, but we got to get the new in. And we got to get everybody. It's so egalitarian. Mm-hmm. Look at the rap. Look at all the, when I go to an AES convention, it's nothing like other stodgy engineering conventions that I go to. It's dramatic and lively, and everybody should just be there. So I just want to thank AES and SoundGirls for being a part of it, but thank AES so much for being forward-thinking and for doing this. So thank you very much.
In fact, if I'm remembering the history of SoundGirls correctly, I believe that the core group of people that we owe this amazing community to actually met at an AES conference. which is,
There you go. Yes.
and I've been able, that's exactly how I met you, thanks to the SoundGirls hosting this after party. I'm just so looking forward to actually meeting some of these amazing women that I've met over the internet through our new technologies this past year. So can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So do you have any kind of advice for people just getting into the industry, and if you had to redo something, like, would you do it slightly differently?
That was a good question that you had on your preview list, and I want to go to my notes on that. It's going to sound like a bunch of slogans, but
Okay.
These are some slogans that I've lived by that other people have told me, or I saw on a poster somewhere. But these slogans are really important. First of all, especially if you're just getting into it, just jump in. You're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. Who cares? It might be embarrassing. Just jump in, full in. And don't be afraid to ask questions. In ham radio, we call it an Elmer. An Elmer is somebody who helps a person get on the air for the first time. But you're always an Elmer, because you might never have done a digital transmission over the air. So you need a digital Elmer. So there's always an Elmer. Like you become an Elmer, so you're helping people below you, and people above you are helping you. So don't be afraid to ask questions, and try to find a good mentor. Because, as I say, call it in ham radio lingo an Elmer. Try to find a good one, somebody who helps you. When I was at RCA Labs, there was this gentleman who really, I won't say his name, but he very rarely spoke to women. And people would pass by. I worked in his lab, and people would pass by and would say, so-and-so's talking to you. I said, yeah. And they said, he doesn't talk to women. So he was like very shy, but brilliant guy. And it was, I think he thought of me as one of the guys, so I was okay. So here this guy went out of where he was afraid, or just uncomfortable, to mentor me. And I would be buzzing out of circuit, trying to find where the short was or what I did wrong in connecting it up. And he'd be standing behind me. He knew exactly what was wrong from what I had already tested. And he'd intone in his low voice, he would say, and he really was a gray beard, he had a long gray beard. He would say, the laws of causality are never violated. What does it even mean? What is he saying? And what he was saying is, you already know the cause, you just haven't registered because you already buzzed the part of the circuit that wasn't connected. You just haven't connected A and B together. And he would just say that. He would always say that phrase. And I often say that. It's helpful even in my forensics. The laws of causality are never violated. And maybe sometimes they are, but it's a great watchword to have. Also learn with your ears and eyes. Watch what other people are doing, and that's where you can also learn so much from going to AES conferences and other types of conferences. But you're listening and you're seeing. And it's not just listening to your audio, to the recordings, but listening to what other people are saying. How are they handling, the performers? How are they feeling in these situations that sometimes can get very tense? Things that are, really important for that. You also need to know when to move on and trust your gut. Like, look at you. You took advantage of the COVID to go to college, to return and further your education. Some people are just sitting there, collecting unemployment. So, I don't know what you have in Canada, but anyway, it's just, you need to sometimes keep yourself in the behind and say, I've gotten to the end of my rope here. Maybe it's a gender issue, maybe it's not, maybe this is just not the right place for me, and need to know, trust your gut. If you're feeling this is not working out, you can even start with just a leave of absence for a month. See what's working for you. But you need to also be careful with your mentors. Some mentors that I had, they were really into stealing my ideas and then getting credit for them. And sometimes grants. And that still happens to many of my colleagues. It's not just me. stuff, and it's even women with women,
Yeah.
women stealing things from other women. That to me is the biggest tragedy. But it just, that goes on all the time. I'm not saying it is just a women's thing, but it can be. So we need to be a little bit extra careful about that and know when to move on from your mentor too. You can still stay in touch with them. I had one mentor, we had a big blowout, and we had talked for 10 years. We recently wrote a paper together. It's been really acclaimed. So, you can always go back. Just don't make the blowout too bad. And build a supportive network. That's where like SoundGirls and things like that will really be helpful. And then you want to give back, and being a part of that network and training others and being an elder to others is also a way to do that. So it's really, that's really important. But the final one, I guess, is don't take no as an answer. I don't know who came up with that phrase, but if somebody says no, you go in their office, look, I've been here 5 years, I've never gotten a promotion. Don't take their, well, no, we don't have a slot for you. That's baloney. So just don't take no for an answer in anything. Just don't take no for an answer. There's always a workaround. You can always figure something else out. So hopefully you don't have to leave. Maybe sometimes you do, but sometimes do things differently. And in all things, you're making a recording, it's not working. Don't take the no from that as an answer. Just always say, okay, there's some way around it. But I think that some of those things, especially the learn with your ears and eyes, those years I spent at RCA, when you would walk in, after they checked your ID, you walked in the front hallway, they always had this big poster with all these things tacked up of all the latest press releases from RCA on paper with a red RCA logo. And I would read those. What is RCA inventing? What are they doing? But in doing so, I actually learned how to write a public relations thing or a news announcement or how to get something on the news, and that had been actually very helpful to me in various aspects of my career, not only with notable software, but with some of my election advocacy and things like that. So all of those, those slogans, some people, some things that I've said have been made into memes, and you can find some of those online. So just type in Rebecca Mercuri meme. I never know what's going to be a meme, so maybe we'll get a meme out of this as well. So that's my advice. It's all positive, so go for it.
I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story and adding it to the SoundGirls Living History Project. It's going to be archived and available public for educational use and research. And we really appreciate your time today. And I know there was tons of other things we could have talked to, like standards and protocols, but we'll have to chat with them, chat about these things in the future.
Yeah, more another time. No, it was great. It was really great. I'm glad we did this. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you.